Welcome to Lily, the voice of Alice von Hildebrand. My name is John Henry Crosby, founder and president of the Hildebrand Project. We now continue our series on Dietrich von Hildebrand's spiritual masterpiece, Transformation in Christ. In this episode, Lily continues her discussion of the 7th chapter of Transformation in Christ, Humility. She explores pride as it shows itself in different philosophies, such as secular humanism and pantheism, and how to counteract them through the Christian vision of God and man. Now, here's Lily.
You know, pride is, as I mentioned in one of our last programs, the greatest danger menacing human beings. No doubt concupiscence is a terrible threat and danger, but pride is worse.
Explain what concupiscence is to our audience.
Well, concupiscence would simply mean to yield to the attraction of lust and self-satisfaction. You know, whether it is laziness, whether it is gluttony, whether it is overeating in any of its form, whether it is sexual intercourse, anything which is linked to intense pleasure, which has a powerful attraction for us since original sin. Now, concupiscence is bad. Concupiscence is evil. It's a grave sin. But pride is worse. You know, you can say that there are cases in which concupiscence is a manifestation of weakness. Pride is always wicked. And in his ethics, my husband makes a distinction between sins of wickedness and sins of weakness. Now, the tragic thing is that pride and concupiscence can be very happily married. And there are very many cases in which pride precisely leads to concupiscence, and the two of them are united. But in and by itself, the sin par excellence is a sin of Satan saying to God, non serviam. I refuse to serve. I refuse to submit. Now, man is a creature, means a being who is contingent, who is totally dependent upon his creator. And this is one thing that pride cannot admit. You know, basically, the sin of Satan is a sin of revolt against this metaphysical position, which is inferior to God. Now, when you look at it from a purely intellectual point of view, it seems to me that pride is incredibly stupid, because it refuses to acknowledge a fact which is, to my mind, absolutely self-evident. I'm not God. I'm imperfect. I'm limited. I'm mortal. You know, whatever talent I have is so little compared to what can be had. It's just, let us say, a drop in an ocean. And therefore, there is absolutely no objective reason for me to feel superior or to oppose God. To oppose God is madness. And nevertheless, it is a temptation for fallen man. It is a temptation of his pride. Say, I'm not going to submit. I refuse to be dependent. And this is Satan. And unfortunately, it is a temptation that works again and again. You know, you can truly win people over to your side by feeding and appealing to their pride. It works because of our fallen nature. Now, this is one form. It is the most diabolical. It is worse. But sometimes it takes forms that are much more subtle. You know, yesterday I mentioned the danger or the attraction of Oriental spirituality for Western people. There's one point that I'd like to emphasize. Why is Oriental spirituality so attractive? Man is not just an animal. He knows full well deep down that he cannot be just satisfied or happy by physical or sexual satisfaction. After a moment, he's going to be sated and look for something else. Much more dangerous is an appeal of what is spiritual when it is stripped of humility. And this is precisely what you find in Oriental spirituality. It is spirituality. It is highly spiritual. It is incredibly ascetic. It does possess many characteristics and many virtues that are very appealing, but it is stripped of humility. You can do it on your own. And I mean, in other words, you see, the whole question, to my mind, separating views of the world and religion is self-redemption or redemption through Christ on the cross. These are the two possibilities.
Well, that's where the New Age movement is getting its
grounding,
you see,
Mr. Koenig, I'm so glad that you mentioned it, because this is one of the things which is terribly much on my mind. And you will notice that it is actually taking a very real shape.
Yes, it is.
You take one of the main plans of Freemasonry, is the unification of the world.
Yes.
Now we're already going to have the unification of Europe, which means that a tremendous power is going to begin to a small minority. Now this small minority are people who simply want to exalt man at the expense of God, and this is called secular humanism. You know, it makes me fear and tremble because I know very well that this new age is not going to be one in which God is king, but it is going to be one in which man is exalted. And in fact, it means just one or a few men. The rest are going to be slaves. Instead of being slaves of God, which is a joy and a liberation, they're going to be slaves of the devil. Therefore, it seems to me that a form of pride, which is much more subtle and much more dangerous, is pantheism.
Pantheism.
Pantheism. You see, because
Now,
if
what
you
is
take,
pantheism? What
well,
does
I
that
mean, pantheism means basically an identification of God and the universe, or the universe with God, whichever way you want to put
Which
it.
means self with God.
The
as well.
cosmos.
Well, of course,
you
and
know,
therefore, you
yeah.
see, look why it is so dangerous, because it gives you the illusion of humility. I'm nothing. I'm just a drop in an ocean, but this ocean is God himself, and so I'm part of God, you see. You know, very much as you find people who have a fierce nationalism, and you will say, I'm Mr. Smith, you know, I'm a very insignificant person, but my country, the United States of America, is the greatest of the world. And all of a sudden, your pride comes back through the back door, you see? And it comes back with a vengeance. So I say pantheism gives one the illusion of humility. And this is why it is so dangerous. You know, just feel, but what am I? Nothing. Man is nothing. It's just, you know, and you will also notice that one of the things which is typical about pantheism is a systematic destruction of the hierarchy of being.
Because they talked about the higher power, but this is what this pantheism.
But
some
you know,
people say
like
higher
the
power.
Freemasons speak about the architect of the universe.
Yes.
But you know, you can understand with it whatever you please. That's
Sure.
totally left up to you, you see.
Right.
Now, if you take Catholic theology or Christian theology, there's such a clear hierarchy.
Yes.
There's God, and then an abysmal distance, and then you have angels, and then men, animal, you know, plants, and so, and then finally inanimate matter. Now, all this is so clearly organized. But this abyss between God and man, which man cannot traverse, can be traversed by God. And this is what he did through love. I mean, in other words, God can reach man, but man cannot reach the plenitude of God by his own effort. Now, in pantheism, you will notice that one of the things which is absolutely amazing is that this hierarchy is destroyed. For example, you take Buddhism. They have the same respect for an insect life than they have for human life. Now, if you respect an insect the way that you respect a human being, it simply shows that you have not understood the mystery of life, because you have eliminated the human person. And so I simply say this is a form of pantheism.
Because this is very true. We had a missionary here talking about in India how they watched a pig eat a child, and they wouldn't touch that pig because it was a blessed pig. You know, I mean, you know. So
well, you go further than that. I mean, a year and a half ago, I was in Europe visiting a friend of mine, and she happened to have an Indian family that was visiting her. And they insisted that we should have dinner at 5 in the afternoon. And, you know, in a roundabout way, we found out why should it be at 5 and not at 6. He said, because then the sun will be setting, and we might eat an insect while eating our food, because the light is not lucid. The idea that a small insect could fall into your soup and then you'll eat it, you know, that would be something absolutely dreadful. Therefore, you can only eat when you can watch your food and be sure there's not an insect in it. Now, I don't like insects in my food, but I don't feel that I'm a criminal if I happen to swallow one, you see. So you see that this is a form of pride, which is infinitely more subtle and infinitely more dangerous. Why do philosophers like Spinoza have such an enormous appeal? Because of their pantheism. You know, you will notice it's full of, you know, it speaks about God constantly. But double check upon what it means by God, and you're going to find out that it is precisely this pantheistic idea, you see?
As well. Hegel as well.
Of course. And in Plotinus you also find something of the sort. I mean, it's only in Judeo-Christian revelation, of a clear, abysmal distinction between God and man. Now look, one of the things that I find so overwhelming about Roman Catholicism, and I'm so unworthy to call myself one, is that there's no religion which has emphasized so much the abysmal difference between God and man, and simultaneously the communion possible between God and man in holy communion.
It's just saying, very simply put, pride divides self-centered against being God-centered, whereas humility unites. We see ourselves in the proper light under God.
Humility and charity, the divine charity, I mean that God condescends to enter into my body.
Yes.
You know, this is what happens in Holy Communion. You know, I've heard Protestants saying, you know, that doesn't make any sense. God would not condescend to do it. But God is infinite love. God precisely turns to what is weak and helpless, provided we just open our hands and say, God, hasten to my help. So therefore you have the two things. An authentic theology keeps these two aspects united. The abysmal difference and simultaneously the closeness in love.
We haven't much time, but I know you've had years of academic experience. I've had several years of academic experience. But concupiscence is common to the human race, to all of us. But academic pride or intellectual pride, and in ecclesiastical circles, what I call spiritual pride, is horrid. It is horrid.
You know, that is going to be our next program. I mean, if we are running out of time, because I'm so glad that you mentioned it. It is, to my mind, one of the saddest and most depressing things that I've come across. Now, just before he died, when my husband confided his huge legacy to me, he said solemnly, if ever you find anything in my writing which is not in full conformity with the teaching of the Church, I beg you, burn it. Now, very few intellectuals who say
Never
that.
do that, that's right.
You see, and I mean that, my love was just overwhelming in this very moment. I said, you know, how beautiful. I mean, he is so talented. He has received such gifts. But he says, if it is not in conformity with the Church, burn it. Don't hesitate.
That is humility.
Well, I mean, and humility makes one more intelligent, and pride makes one very stupid. Sometimes I feel like saying to people, now look, if you truly want to be intelligent, try to get some humility. Because, you know, humility opens my mind to things. Pride narrows it. You know, pride is a sort of cramp that prevents me from saying many things that anybody can see. You know, and therefore the worst mistakes are made by intellectuals. Beware of intellectuals if they have no humility.
Thank you for listening to Lily, the voice of Alice von Hildebrand. We hope you enjoyed this episode. New episodes of Lily are released every week. Please share our podcast with your friends and family, and subscribe on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to support the production of this podcast, we invite you to become a monthly donor or to give a one-time gift. To donate, please visit hildebrandproject.org/giving. For more information and updates, follow the Hildebrand Project on social media and sign up for our newsletter in the show notes. Thank you again for listening and helping support the legacy of Alice von Hildebrand.